Shalom, welcome back to the Sequential Zohar series. Today we are in Bereshit A, chapter 9, a section called Let There Be Lights. And right away, the Zohar does something very Zohar-like. It takes a verse we think we already know, a verse from creation, and it slows us down. It says, wait. Do not just read the sentence. Look at the letters. Look at what is missing. Look at what the Torah is whispering underneath the surface. The verse says, "Let there be lights." Me'orot. But in the Torah, the word is written in a deficient way without the vav. To the Zohar, that missing vav is not a spelling detail. It is a spiritual opening. The word for lights begins to lean toward another meaning, a darker meaning, the language of curse. So the question for us is not only, what are the lights of creation? The question is, what happens when light is incomplete? What happens when illumination exists, but something in the channel is missing? What happens when blessing is meant to shine, but the vessel is not yet whole? That is the heart of this passage. Now, this chapter uses strong imagery. It speaks about illness, danger, destructive forces, the vulnerability of children, the waning of the moon, shells around the fruit, and spiritual forces that attach themselves to human weakness. So I want to say this clearly. We are reading this as mystical teaching. It is not medical advice, and it is not a reason to be afraid. If anything, the Zohar is trying to show us how fear is transformed into protection and how concealment can become a doorway back to light. The first idea is that before these lower lights appear, the primordial light has already been hidden. That sentence matters deeply. Creation begins with a light that is too pure, too direct, too overwhelming for ordinary reality. It cannot simply remain exposed. It has to be concealed. And when that original light is concealed, something else appears around it. The Zohar calls that something a klippah, a shell. Most people hear the word klippah and think evil. And yes, in many places, klippah means blockage, distortion, the outer husk that hides holiness. But in this chapter, the picture is more subtle. A shell can block the fruit, but it can also protect the fruit. A shell can be the place where impurity gathers, but it can also mark the boundary that allows the inner point to survive. So the Zohar is giving us a map of reality. First, there is inner light. Then, there is concealment. Then, there is a covering. And then, if that covering becomes too strong, it stops being protection and becomes attachment. It wants to cling to the holy form. It wants to take on the shape of holiness without being holiness itself. That is a deep teaching. There are things in life that begin as protection and then become prison. A habit can protect us for a season and then keep us stuck. An identity can help us survive and then become the mask we cannot take off. A boundary can preserve the inner self, but if we never open it, it becomes a wall. The Zohar describes a force that tries to attach itself to the small face, to the more revealed, emotional face of the divine structure. And when Adam is created, that force is pushed down. It is separated from the higher place and limited to the lower world. In plain language, when the human being appears, the spiritual drama becomes human. The question is no longer only what happens above. The question becomes, how does hiddenness show up in us? Then the text turns to Adam and Eve. It says that when this negative shell sees Eve joined to Adam, sees the complete form, it wants to attach again. But the gates are guarded. The force is not allowed to enter that wholeness. It is rebuked and cast into the depths of the sea. This is a symbolic language, but practical. Wholeness attracts imitation. Wherever there is real connection, there will also be forces that want to counterfeit connection. Wherever there is holiness, there will also be ego that wants to dress itself up as holiness. Wherever there is intimacy, there will be fantasy, projection, control, and desire trying to pass themselves off as love. The guards at the gates matter. In our lives, those guards are discernment. They are humility. They are patience. They are the willingness to ask, is this actually holy, or does it only look holy from a distance? Is this connection making me more whole, or is it feeding something that wants to attach and consume? The Zohar then gives one of its most intense images. After the sin of Adam and Eve, the shell that had been cast down is released again, and it wanders near the gates of the earthly Garden of Eden, close to the flashing sword. That sword turns. It moves between mercy and judgment. When the sword turns toward judgment, the destructive force finds openings. The text connects this with the waning of the moon. When the moon's light grows smaller. Again, do not hear this as superstition. Hear it as a spiritual law. When light diminishes, whatever is unresolved comes closer to the surface. When clarity fades, old patterns become louder. When the inner moon is full, we can see our way. when the inner moon is waning, we have to be more careful with our thoughts, our words, our habits, and our homes. The Zohar speaks about children because children represent the small face of humanity. They are tender, they are open, they are not fully guarded. On a simple level, the text is calling for protection of children. On a deeper level, it is calling for protection of the childlike place inside every soul, the place that is trusting, soft, unfinished, and easy to wound. Every one of us has that place. There is a part of us that is strong and adult and practical, but there is also a part that still needs covering, blessing, and careful speech. The Zohar is saying, do not leave the small face unprotected. Do not let the vulnerable place wander alone in a world of mixed forces. Then comes a darker section about night, desire, and spiritual confusion. The Zohar speaks about figures like Na'amah and about spirits that move through the night, stirring fantasy, lust, isolation, and defilement. For a modern listener, this can sound strange. But translate the image into human experience, and it becomes painfully familiar. There are forces that grow stronger when a person is isolated. There are desires that become distorted in secrecy. There are thoughts that visit at night that would lose their power if brought into light. There are habits that laugh at us, pull at us, and leave us feeling drained, ashamed, or divided. The Zohar is not trying to make us obsessed with demons. It is trying to make us honest about attachment. What do I allow to cling to me when I am tired? What enters my mind when my guard is down? What do I feed in secret and then wonder why it has strength in public? Where am I trying to receive comfort from something that actually weakens my soul? That is the work. And then, right in the middle of all this darkness, the Zohar gives the healing. When the moon is restored, the same letters are transformed. The letters that were read in the direction of curse can be rearranged toward Imrat, the word as in the verse, the word of Hashem is refined, and he is a shield for those who trust in him. That is the whole teaching in one movement. The missing letter Vav shows a world where light is incomplete. Incomplete light can become curse, fear, and vulnerability. But when the moon is restored, when the feminine vessel receives and reflects light again, the letters turn. The curse becomes word. The danger becomes shield. The same material that frighten us becomes the language of protection. This is why Hebrew letters matter so much in the Zohar. Letters are not just symbols on a page. They are channels. They can be arranged in one way and reveal judgment. They can be arranged another way and reveal mercy. The work of the spiritual person is to rearrange the inner letters. Take the letters of your fear and form prayer. Take the letters of your shame and form honesty. Take the letters of your confusion and form a question. Take the letters of your pain and form compassion. The Zohar does not deny darkness. It shows how darkness can be reorganized around faith. Then King Solomon enters the teaching through the image of the nut. The Zohar says Solomon descended into the garden of nuts and understood the secret of the shell. A nut has layers. There is an outer covering, then another covering, and then the inner food. If you judge only by the shell, you will never taste the fruit. But if there were no shell at all, the fruit would not have been preserved. This is one of the most important balances in spiritual life. Not every shell is your enemy. Some shells need to be broken. Some need to be respected. Some need to be outgrown. Some are protecting something that is not ready to be exposed. People have shells. Families have shells. Traditions have shells. Even sacred teachings have shells. The outer story protects the inner light until the student is ready to receive it. But the danger is when the shell starts pretending to be the fruit. That is when religion becomes performance. That is when wisdom becomes vocabulary. That is when spirituality becomes an identity instead of a transformation. The shell is useful only when it serves the inner point. From there, the Zohar expands the idea to all worlds. Everything is layered. One level is inner compared to the level below it, and outer compared to the level above it. What is shell in one relationship becomes fruit in another. What is garment in one world becomes soul in another world. That is a beautiful and humbling idea. It means we should be careful before we label anything too quickly. Something that looks external may be protecting a deeper secret. Something that feels like the center may be only a garment for something deeper still. The Zohar applies this to the human being. The soul has layers: neshamah, ruah, nefesh, and body, inner life and outer form, spirit and vessel. We are not just bodies, but we are not meant to despise the body either. The body is a garment and also a tool. The outer life can hide the inner soul, but it can also reveal it. This is why the chapter ends by returning to the moon and the lights. When the moon was united with the sun, it had its own brightness. When it separated and diminished, shells upon shells were created to cover the inner point. But the Zohar says all of this was for the completion of the world. That line changes everything. The shell is not the end of the story. The diminishing is not the end of the story. The missing letter is not the end of the story. It is part of the repair. Without a shell, there is no fruit. Without concealment, there is no search. Without the waning moon, we would never learn how to protect light when light feels small. So, what do we take from this chapter? First, pay attention to what is missing. Sometimes, the deepest teaching is not in what appears, but in the absent letter, the pause, the lack, the place that feels unfinished. Second, protect the vulnerable light. Protect children. Protect the tender places in yourself. Protect the spaces where holiness is still young. Third, learn the difference between a shell that protects and a shell that imprisons. Do not worship the shell, but do not rush to smash every boundary either. Ask what the shell is serving. Fourth, when your inner moon is waning, do not panic. Strengthen your guards. Choose better company. Bring secret thoughts into honest light. Return to prayer, study, rhythm, and trust. And fifth, rearrange the letters. Do not let curse have the final word. Let the word become a shield. That is the power of this Zohar passage. It begins with a missing vav, with lights that are not fully spelled, and it ends with the possibility that even the broken spelling can be turned toward protection. The world is full of shells, but the fruit is real. The light may be hidden, but it's not gone. The moon may diminish, but it can be restored. And the letters that once looked like judgment can be turned through faith into blessing. So as we close, hold one question. Where in my life is there a missing vav? Where is the channel incomplete? Where has light become mixed with fear, protection become control, or shell become identity? And then ask the next question. What would it mean to restore the moon there? What would it mean to bring that place back under blessing? What word of faith, spoken consistently and honestly, could become a shield around that vulnerable light? That is our work from Bereshit A chapter 9. Not to run from the shells, and not to live inside them forever, but to recognize them, refine them, and keep moving inward until we reach the fruit, the inner point, the light that was hidden from the beginning. Thank you for learning with me. In the next part of the Sequential Zohar series, we will keep following the text step by step, staying close to the words, the symbols, and the soul of the teaching. Until then, may the hidden light be protected in you. May the diminished places be restored, and may the letters of your life turn toward blessing. Shalom.